Hi, my name is Steve Tomey. I am the supervisor for the Cultural Resources Program here at the Great Basin District. And that covers archaeology, history, museum services, and generally managing the cultural aspect of the parks here within the Great Basin District. And today we're here at Tomo-Kahni State Historic Park. Tomo-Kahni is a Native American word from the Nuwa people, or Kawayasu, that means winter home. And we're going to be going around here at the park and looking on our trail walk today, and looking at several spots. One of them is going to be a village site. We're going to look at some other bedrock mortars and some other features on our trail walk today. And then we're going to end at a place called Creation Cave, which is where the Kawayasu people, or the Nuwa, believe that creation sprang from. So we're happy to have you with us today, and let's go get on our trail walk. Well, hi, we're back. We're here along the trail at Tomo-Kahni State Historic Park on our way to Creation Cave, and we're passing by what's known as the village site. And if you look down at the bedrock here that's in front of me, you can see a number of grinding holes into this bedrock. We call those bedrock mortars. And these were used to process different foods and different plant resources in the area. Typically, it would be pinon nuts or acorns from oaks, and they would be placed in these holes, and then you would take another rock that would be kind of oblong shaped, and you would crush it up, and that's called a pestle. So a mortar and a pestle. You might see something like that at a modern pharmacy today. And they would use that to grind it up and make it into a powder or a coarse flour. The flour would then be leached. You'd have to run water through it to get out the tannic acid, the impurities, and then you would make that into basically a bread or a mush, and it would be cooked in a basket. Now, how do you cook in a basket? Now, that's an interesting question. Native Americans in this area would take great time and effort to make these wonderfully woven baskets out of native grasses, and they'd be watertight. So you would fill the basket with your mush or your flour and water mixture, and it'd be kind of soupy looking. And then you would take a rock from the fire, right, a special kind of rock, quartzite typically, and you would drop it into that basket, and you would stir it constantly, and that rock would transfer 100% of its heat to the liquid, almost like that. So it'd be a wonderful way of cooking, because they didn't have steel pots or pottery in this area, because if you're constantly moving, a pot's kind of a bad thing, because you take a pot and you drop it, oops, it busted, now you gotta go make another pot. You make a basket and you drop it, well, nothing happens to the basket, it just kind of bounces, and you can reuse it again and again. So it was one of the ways that they adapted to the local environment. Now, if you look behind me down into this canyon, just behind me, this is an area called Nettle Springs. And one of the reasons these bedrock borders are here are because they were processing those acorn materials, but they also needed water nearby, which is why we're here, because just below us is Nettle Springs. And that spring ran year round, and they could go down and collect water and bring it up, or they would take their acorn meal down there to process it at the spring itself. So think about that next time you have a sandwich or you have some oatmeal at home, about how easy just to open a packet and put it on the stove and boil it. Well, at this time period, you'd have to crush it up, make it into a fine meal, and do all those steps before you got to enjoy your meal. So we'll see you to the next stop. Hi, we're back. We're at a spot across the canyon from where we just were at the bedrock mortars. We call this the woman's place. If you look here on this sandstone outcrop, we see a number of striations. Now, what this means is we're not 100% sure. We think this was some type of possibly a calendar of marking special days, certain time periods, but you notice it's got some red ochre rubbed on that. So you have to ask yourself, why would you mark a rock like this? Now, the story is that this was located away from the main part of the village, and that women would congregate here. And sometimes people will look at this rock area behind me, or that I'm standing in, and we would call this the portal. A lot of times in Native American ceremonies, it involved transitioning from your regular reality to some sort of altered reality. So we think that this might have been a place where women would come to meditate or be away from the main part of the tribe. Sometimes when they were menstruating, typically. And that calendar might have something to do with that. And they would sit here to cleanse themselves before they went back to the main part of the tribe for a certain period of time. We really don't know. So a lot of this is based off of interviews with tribal elders. And not always able to tell us everything, especially when the tribal elder is a man and may not have all the secrets for what the women in his family did. But it's something to consider. So as we go back, you want to take a look at these striations one more time and think to yourself, why would you make marks like that? Well, hi, we're back here again. We're on the hillside, not too far from where we were last time, on the main part of the village site. And I want to talk to you a little bit today on this stop about what we call lithic material. Now right here I have a couple of stone flakes. This is made out of chert, and this is made of obsidian. Obsidian is volcanic glass. So if you're going to make a cutting tool at this time period in history, Native Americans would take preferably obsidian, and they would flint knap it or chip it to make different shapes, youthful shapes, and you would use this for a cutting tool for cutting meat or animals or for hunting tools. This chert's a little tougher, it's a little harder to flake, but it's a little bit better suited towards carving wood or making something out of wood or cutting branches, whatever you want to like that, because obsidian is extremely sharp, sharper than a razor, but it's very, very brittle. Whereas a chert's a little bit tougher, but not quite as sharp. So we'll find remains like this of what we call lithic material, or the fancy word is called debitage, that is waste flakes from making some other tool. And that's evidence that people were living here and that they were making tools and they were habitating here in this area. Now something else that we found right in this area, this is called a ground stone. Some people might call this a matade. You see this flat surface? If you could feel this right now with your hand, it would be just super smooth. And that's because of that grinding process that we talked about earlier at our last stop. Same principle, only this was rubbed back and forth. So as you rub two rocks together, guess what happens? That's right, you break off pieces and it becomes very, very smooth. And you would use that to process not only acorns and other plant materials, acorns and pinon nuts and pine nuts. Sometimes you would process animals that way too, to make the meat more tender, or you might mix in nuts and vegetable or nuts and fruit into your meat to dry it to make something that's called pemmican. They didn't really make pemmican here in the classical sense, but they made something very similar. Now further on down the trail is Creation Cave, and we're going to show you some still photographs of Creation Cave of the rock art. Trail's not in the greatest condition right now, so we won't do the full hike today. We'd like to thank you for coming along with us on this little expedition into the history of Tomo-Kahni State Historic Park, and we look forward to your visit someday. Thank you.